Yeah. Oh, yeah, so delicious. Is that a chicken-eating KFC? That's so ironic! That's like CEOs for Luigi. That's like children for Minecraft YouTubers. That's like
queers for Palestine.
For anyone in the rainbow community involved in anti-genocide activism for Palestine, this is a classic experience. Not being a literal chicken-eating KFC, of course, but being mocked by Zionists who claim that the average Palestinian would tear you apart and eat you alive for the sin of being fruity. I mean, it's the same line Zionists use over and over again to pinkwash the genocide that basically every human rights organization agrees Israel's committing against Palestinians.
They'd throw you off a roof in Gaza. Hamas wouldn't respect your pronouns. Double, double, toil and trouble. Palestinians would put thou in a cauldron of bubble.
Wait, wow, that one was kind of poetic. Whether it be flying a pride flag in the ruins of Gaza, attacking queer pop stars like Chapel Roan, flexing Tay-Tay's bodyguard working for the IDF, or Netanyahu using the chickens for KFC line in front of Congress, it seems every half-washed Zionist these days is eager to cash in on their $700 and use the facade of queer liberation to yassify a genocide. Of course, it shouldn't take YouTube video to tell you that it's basic morality to oppose mass murder, regardless of what its victims think of queer rights. It doesn't matter whether or not the victims of the Holocaust, or Rwandan genocide, or Bosnian genocide read up on their Judith Butler, genocide in itself is wrong. And no one, especially the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians murdered by Israel, can have rights if they're dead. But there's something especially repugnant about using a symbol of liberation on the ruins of a genocide. And as a queer person invested in liberation for everyone, it's far most up to us to dispel Zionist pinkwashing talking points, expose their origins in hasbara, and boil down the homonationalist narrative they perpetuate. And maybe, along the way, we'll find true love. Wait, is that Chapel Roan? Can I get a picture? In 2014, the New York Times ran an advertisement that went a little something like this. Hamas, ISIS, and Iran kill gays like me. Israel is the only country in the Middle East where I can live without fear. Wow, what a brave gay. Israel is truly a beacon of hope for the gays. Anyway, I wonder what else was happening in 2014. Oh. Yeah, so that's the basic playbook of Zionist pinkwashing. Murder Palestinians and then throw rainbow glitter in the face of a Western liberal audience to distract them from their war crimes. And unless you somehow believe that Israeli missiles have a gaydar that prevent them from hitting queer Palestinians, it should be obvious that advertisements like these are cynical ploys to distract from Israel's crimes against humanity. Before examining allegations of Palestinian homophobia or Israeli LGBT acceptance that advertisements like this perpetuate, and trust me, we will dig into it, it would be naive to take them at face value. For one, it costs a lot of money to run advertisements and publicity campaigns, and this money doesn't come from nowhere. Instead, it's part of a conscious, decades-long effort by Israel to pinkwash their apartheid, occupation, and genocide. And sometimes this work is so sloppy, it literally boils down to massacring thousands of Palestinians and then running an advertisement saying it's okay because they're all homophobic anyway. Brand Israel is a marketing relations campaign launched by the Zionist entity in 2005 after consulting experts who, after years of careful study and analysis, said, yeah, this occupation and apartheid thing is not a good look. Kicking off the campaign in 2007 with $4 million, in addition to the $3 million annually already allocated to hasbara, Brand Israel initially attempted to woo a marginalized demographic long forgotten about in the mainstream. Horny straight guys.
Is that a female? Oh.
These men, much like Gal Gadot herself, couldn't act, and follow-up studies showed improved perceptions of Israel from the campaign. In the next few years, Israel decided this approach was too narrow and embraced a wider audience. Gay guys. In 2010, Israel's Ministry of Tourism, the Tel Aviv Tourism Board, and Israel's largest LGBT organization launched the online tourism campaign, Tel Aviv Gay Vibe, to promote Tel Aviv as the destination for European gays. $94 million of Israeli government money in 2010 was spent on promoting gay tourism. The purpose of this queer pivot was, as an anonymous foreign minister put it, to let European and American liberals know about the gay community in Israel and to highlight this country's support of human rights. Of course, the irony of washed-up gay tourists sniffing poppers and partying to terrible EDM music in Tel Aviv is that it's an hour away from the open-air prison that is the Gaza ghetto. In Gaza, Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from their homes and crammed into a tiny strip of land, survive under a decades-long horrific blockade under conditions that Israeli historian Ilan Pappé described as an incremental genocide even before October 7th. Zionist pinkwashing is a multi-million-dollar state effort consciously undertaken to cover up Israeli war crimes. Underlying pinkwashing exists a colonial logic of dehumanization, justifying the occupation of Palestinians by saying they're less than human. Before examining the concrete reality of queer life in Israel and Palestine, this logic needs to be deconstructed, and luckily for us, it has a name. Homonationalism was coined by Jasbir K. Kapoor in her book Terrorist Assemblages, which she describes as a framework where certain gay people are tied to nationalist agendas while contributing to the othering of victims of imperial violence. It's basically the yassification of imperialism, portraying gay genocidal soldiers as progressive for raising a pride flag on the ruins of brown people's destroyed homes. Homonationalism is the logic and wider geopolitical context underlying pinkwashing, and although Kapoor wrote about it mainly in relation to the US war on terror, the term has been applied to Israel. For one, Israel's gay marketing strategy likes to portray itself as a civilized quote-unquote country, pointing to gay life and Tel Aviv and contrasting it with an alleged perpetual persecution of gay people in Palestine. And for another, the mainstream Israeli LGBT community is more than happy to go along with this portrayal. In exchange for certain Israeli gays being included into nationhood and national institutions like the IDF, they eagerly do their part in the occupation and oppression of Palestinians. The complicity of Israeli LGBT organizations goes as far as blocking Palestinian Queer Org from speaking at a 2009 memorial of 2 youths killed in an LGBT center in fear it would be too political. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, what? There are queer Palestinian organizations? And there are anti-LGBT shootings in Israel? There are two parts to Israel's pinkwashing. First, portray Israel as a progressive bastion of civilization through the enlightened way it treats its gays, and second, contrast it with alleged barbaric Palestinian homophobia. Of course, neither portrayal is true, and the state of gay life in both is far more nuanced than free grinder premium in Israel versus infinite Millie Bobby Browns in Palestine. Much of Israel's pinkwashing relies on pretending the gay-friendly and ethnically cleansed beaches of Tel Aviv represent the entirety of the country, but that's simply not true. According to LGBT Israelis themselves, outside Tel Aviv, the situation is bad and way below par. In Jerusalem's Pride Parade, for example, 3 participants were stabbed by a Jewish extremist in clashes between marchers and ultra-Orthodox protesters. Israeli homophobia is so bad it often ends up giving the lie to the Israeli government's pinkwashing schemes. Remember the Tel Aviv Gay Vibe campaign I mentioned earlier? Here are a few comments underneath the article announcing it.
Surely nothing to be proud of. Shameful. Thanks for warning. Now I know not. Yes, by all means, bring hordes of
AIDS.
Israeli society is not this monolithically progressive and enlightened country on LGBT rights. In fact, outside Tel Aviv, it's very much dominated by religious and social conservatism, especially seen in the growing dominance of religious Zionism. Homophobia is built into Israel's laws, gay marriage is not legal, and for that matter neither is interfaith marriage, and a self-declared fascist homophobe is in one of the highest positions of government. But I already know what Zionists are going to say in response. So, queer rights in Israel aren't perfect, but even a freak like you would be safe in Tel Aviv. I mean, just look at Hamas. Whenever a Hamas sees a gay, they get squashed with a comically large mallet. It's so bad there, Israel has to go in and save the Palestinian gays. So this idea that Israel quote-unquote saves Palestinian gays is entirely fictional. As a racist, ethno-supremacist apartheid state, Israel is obsessed with engineering a Jewish demographic majority. Consequently, it makes the lives of queer Palestinians fleeing persecution a living hell, granting them temporary stay permits that have to be renewed every few months while denying them work permits, shelter, healthcare, or even the ability to open up a bank account. Of the over 60 queer Palestinians who fled the West Bank and sought asylum in Israel, many have reported sleeping on the streets, working under the table, and surviving through prostitution. A condition for renewing their stay permits is that applicants must apply for resettlement outside Israel, operating under the Zionist ethno-supremacist logic that the fewer Arabs in Israel, the better. In an investigation by 972 magazine, a queer Palestinian remarked, "If I had known what it was really like, I would have rather died in the West Bank than live here like this." There's no pink door to the apartheid wall. Saving the gays is just a remix on old colonial tropes of saving the women from third world barbarians by colonizing them. Of course, in the context of Palestine, there's a deeply Islamophobic character to Zionist pinkwashing, and at the center of these Islamophobic attacks is I've already made a more detailed video debunking misconceptions about Hamas, which you can watch here, but the crux of it is that the Zionist framing of the movement as irrational anti-Semitic terrorists is objectively incorrect. The movement has always been deeply pragmatic and open to change, which can be seen in its 2017 charter, which differentiates between Zionism and Judaism, is open to a form of a two-state solution, and supports a democratic, not theocratic Palestinian state. But Zionist pinkwashing collapses the dynamic and pragmatic nature of Hamas as a national liberation movement into a singular blob that includes ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Iran, and anything else Muslim. I already covered why Hamas is different from groups like ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Rather than advocating for a transnational theocratic caliphate, Hamas supports a democratic Palestinian state and limits its armed struggle to the confines of historic Palestine. But that hasn't stopped Zionists from trotting out the old line everyone's familiar with.
I think it's a little ironic that the people who seem to be defending Hamas online are also the ones they'd be most likely to kill. Oh no, I'm sure the Islamic terrorists would love you, queer intellectual feminist.
Free Palestine, free Gaza, buddy. You have they, them, they, zer, dragon / AirPod in your bio. I would love to hear the Palestinians' thoughts on you.
Don't these woke homosexuals know that Hamas would rather slash them than respect their they/them pronouns? These people are literally chickens for KFC. Hamas would gobble them up and probably get really big. Kinda like this. Whoa! Whoa!
So are these hasbaras lying through their toes? Does Hamas actually throw people off roofs? No, Alleged footage and images of Hamas executing gay people were actually conducted by ISIS, and as I covered in my last video, Hamas and ISIS are enemies, with Hamas cracking down on ISIS-linked Israeli-supported gangs in Gaza that have been stealing aid. Homosexuality's legal status is also not the blanket immediate death penalty by panel-smashing stereotype parroted by Zionists. In the West Bank, homosexual acts were decriminalized before Israel in 1951, with the adoption of the Jordanian Penal Code, while Gaza still operates more or less on the 1936 British Colonial Code. Although some have interpreted this colonial code to mean homosexual acts are criminalized in Gaza, others argue it allows consenting homosexual acts between adults. Of course, none of this means anything if Hamas is actually out there executing gay people, but the closest case is Hamas executing one of their male commanders over allegations of embezzlement and engaging in intercourse with men. While this story has been popularized by a handful of news outlets, the allegations have yet to be confirmed and remained contested. Outside of this one sensationalized case, there's little evidence that the British Colonial Code's provision against homosexuality is enforced in Gaza. That's not to excuse the existence of the law, which, may I remind you, was imposed by British colonizers, but for as much as hasbaras love to recite that Hamas throws gay people off roofs, there's basically nothing supporting it.
If gays have it so good in Palestine, why can't I log into Grindr in Hebron? Where are the gay clubs in Gaza? And why do people look at me weird in Ramallah when I wear my butt plug tail in public?
Okay, this may sound like a classic spooky scary socialist bit, but the first two are actually real questions that students ask queer Palestinian scholar Saed Atshan, and it goes to show the level that Zionist pinkwashing is operating on. As he said in response, is whether or not Grindr is used among Palestinians a more important question than the condition in Hebron that Palestinians endure as a result of Israeli occupation there? It perplexed me that the absence of gay clubs in Gaza is more outrageous to some people than the reality of queer and straight Palestinians in Gaza struggling to survive amid unspeakable conditions imposed by Israel. And these talking points have only gotten more ridiculous since October 7th, considering, there can't really be gay clubs in Gaza when almost all the infrastructure there has been systematically destroyed by Israel. And let's not forget the West Bank, where settler violence has only gotten worse, with violent extremists clubbing Palestinian grandmas in the head. In fact, in one particularly bad pinkwashing incident, Zionists falsely blamed the 2014 kidnapping and burning alive of a Palestinian teenager by Israelis as a homophobic honor killing done by his family. Of course, this was a bald-faced lie, and goes to show how pinkwashing is nothing more than a colonial tool to shift blame away from Israel's own crimes. Stepping back from this pinkwash framing, however, we can see that queer life in Palestine is far more complex than the Hamas insta-nuke that Zionists pretend happened when you walk outside with a pronoun pin. Talking to queer Palestinians, they're able to live relatively normal lives, at least when they're not under active attack by Zionist settlers or soldiers. Some of them are able to come out to close family and friends and develop an underground community with events organized by Palestinian queer organizations like Al-Qaz and Aswad. And although they're scared by wider social homophobia, that's not particularly unique to Palestine, and as mentioned before, includes much of Israel outside Tel Aviv. Queer Palestinians are not these supposed perpetual victims of Islamic homophobia that Zionists love to portray. They make a life in Palestine, form organizations, create community, and struggle both for greater social acceptance and against the Zionist occupation. Victimhood does not define them, so does agency and resistance. If anything, the common thread among queer Palestinians is how the Zionist occupation makes life so much harder. Beyond the usual ways the occupation makes life for queer Palestinians worse by making the lives of all Palestinians worse, they also actively target and prey on queer Palestinians in particular. Israeli intelligence agencies regularly blackmail queer Palestinians into collaboration, with agents literally trained to memorize different words for homo in Arabic. This coercion creates a wider perception that queer Palestinians in particular are traitors and collaborators. Of course, this isn't true. Israeli intelligence regularly blackmails any vulnerable Palestinian, including those seeking medical treatment, suffering from financial stress, or have family members going through an illness. But this idea isn't helped by the fact that Israel regularly sabotages efforts by queer Palestinian organizations like Aswad from holding events. Instead, they prefer to send in Israeli organizations to quote-unquote teach Palestinian communities about LGBT rights. So the Zionist occupation directly enforces the view that queer Palestinians are traitors or foreign from their own society, making their lives all the more difficult. What all this colonial discourse about saving queer Palestinians ignores is, self-determination. Much as the whole of Palestine has struggled for over a century for national liberation, first from the British and now from the Zionist entity, queer Palestinians will forge their own identity unique to their own culture and experiences. It may not look like the Western idea of rainbow flags, pride parades, or brat iconography, and that's fine. It's not up to the colonizer to impose their customs on the colonized. So, no. Although queer life in Palestine is difficult, it's in continuity with queer life in any other socially conservative society, including rural areas of the United States and Israel. And this idea that Palestine is uniquely homophobic or Hamas is throwing gay people off roofs is objectively incorrect. Being a queer for Palestine is not something ridiculous, like chickens for KFC.
Cluck you. You're expressing your true feelings about me, huh?
What? No, that's not what I meant. Wait, don't cross the road! We've covered the millions of dollars Israel pours into its pinkwashing campaigns, from Brand Israel to Tel Aviv Gay Vibe. We broke down its underlying homo-nationalist logic, debunking the idea that Israel is inherently and uniformly pro-gay, while Palestine is inherently and uniformly homophobic. The point of Zionist pinkwashing is to divide Palestinians, splitting queer Palestinians from the rest of Palestinian society. But as we've seen, queer Palestinians suffer and go through the same occupation, apartheid, and genocide that all Palestinians go through. And although they struggle against homophobia, it's one that isn't unique to Palestine. There's no such thing as Hamas throwing gay people off roofs any more than there were 40 beheaded babies. At the end of the day, all this Zionist pinkwashing is just a woker way of doing colonialism. It isn't fashionable nowadays to call Palestinians subhuman, so modern colonizers have resorted to calling them subhuman because they're allegedly ultra-homophobes, which is not only untrue, but distracts from the violence of the occupation and the fact that, even if every Zionist allegation were true, it would still never justify genocide. Pinkwashing is more than a ridiculous internet gotcha. It's an entire propaganda apparatus built to make you forget that Palestinians, queer or not, are being brutalized in real time. And the only antidote to that propaganda is refusing to let Zionists turn queerness into a shield for apartheid. So the next time someone tries to distract you with a rainbow flag planted on the rubble of Gaza, remember that queer struggle has always been against the systems that cage, brutalize, and erase people, not the ones fighting to survive them. And if that makes us chickens for KFC, then fine. At least we're not the ones deep frying human rights and calling it pride. Thank you to all my lovely patrons, especially my top tier supporters Fiasco Linguini, Caleb Peters, and Adrian Solares. These videos take a long time to make, especially the animation, and without the support of these wonderful patrons, it would be very difficult to make this type of content on YouTube. In addition to the transcript, sources, and soundtrack, I've linked to GazaFunds.com in the description, which includes vetted fundraising campaigns for people on the ground in Gaza. Winter has been very harsh, and with the latest quote-unquote ceasefire, crowdfunding for Palestinians in Gaza has slowed down, but if you can, please support a campaign. Thank you for watching, and as always, no war but the class war. I'm sorry. I thought you kicked the bucket.
I would never do that to my KFC.
They always say queers for Palestine is like chickens for KFC, but what they didn't expect is that a queer for Palestine would love a chicken for KFC. What the fuck?